Happy Thursday, Xavier Muskie fans. This is your weekly Razorcast. That's Reaker and Zink talking Muskies basketball here just a couple of days before the Crosstown Shootout. So exciting times. Before we get to that, we'll welcome in Jimmy the Reek back from Las Vegas and seeing the Muskies out there at the Continental Tire Invitational.
Yeah, and now we got the shootout sitting right around the corner, coming at us quick. Great time out in the desert. Of course, didn't end like we wanted it to for the Musketeers, but I was over it in about 5 minutes. You know, on with life. You know, sports is great to watch, but can't take it too seriously. And it's early. Musketeers weren't going to have a perfect season. I was pretty much resigned to that. You know that. Key is they're playing some tough games here early. I think it's going to pay off. May pay off as early as Saturday, I think, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, but let's go back to Las Vegas there. You alluded to it. Fortunately, the Muskies' first loss, I think it's a tough Arizona State Sun Devils team that they had down at the half, and the second half just did not go their way at all. They ran into a bit of a storm there between their stalwarts in the Evans, Holder, and Justice. And Holder, who'd been kept in check the night before against Kansas State, sort of exploded on the Muskies. So you were there in the stands. You got to see it. What happened out there?
Well, I'm going to tell you, here's my theory on it, and everybody has their theories. But, yeah, I was there, and I actually went back and checked the play-by-play to see if what I kind of thought happened really happened. So just to give you a recap, with 3 minutes and 16 seconds remaining in the first half, the Musketeers were up by 15 points. In fact, I remember the thought that, hey, they're about ready to bury these guys, blow them out, and this is just going to be like the game of the day before against GW. You know, it's going to be a 25-point win, and they're going to win this tournament, and they're going to feel good about themselves. But at the 3:16 mark, this is what I think was the key to the whole game. Quentin Gooden got his third foul, and he was taken out of the game. And from that point on, the Musketeers, I believe, got outscored 15-2 before the break at half, and only held a 46-44 lead. Now, why do I think there's two things here. I believe that Quentin is a very good defender, and Paul Scruggs, who's going to be a great player, but he's a freshman, and he's trying to get used to the speed of the college game. I don't think plays the defense quite as well as Quentin, so I think that allowed the guards, and remember we talked about actually it was Thursday, I believe. Yeah, I know it's Friday morning when we had our show. I was worried about the speed of their guards, and I think that's what helped the guards take over, get into the lane, kick out for some threes, and so I think that was very, very important. The other thing I think is important on the other side of the coin is Quentin Gooden doesn't necessarily score a lot of points, but he runs the show, and I think even if he usually leads the team in assists if you look at the box score, but even when he's not getting an assist, I think him running the offense, he gets everybody in the right spot and gets everything started in a timely manner. So again, they're not up against the shot clock, and also just getting people in the right places for whatever they're running against, whichever defense they're playing. So, again, I think that was important because then go into the second half. Again, they had a 2-point lead at halftime. But at the 6:16 mark in the second half, the score was 56-55. Arizona State had a 1-point lead. And then, again, Quentin picked up his fourth foul. It was a charging foul. In fact, I was sitting so close, I could hear Max say to him, man, you just got to be smart. What are you doing out there? Because he was kind of out of control, and it was an obvious call. And he sat down, and from the point he sat down, again, that's when I think the Arizona run started again, and then it got out of control. By the time they got him back in the game, it was too far gone because the Musketeers at one point, I think with about 5 minutes left, were down by 20 points. So that's my take on it. And the other thing, I think this is a pretty good Arizona State team, maybe better than some people thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season, although I will give you kudos on our Trodcast because you cover the Pac-12. You said that this is a team to watch out for. Bobby Hurley's really starting to have his effect on them, and so I give you credit. I think you called that one correctly. I think this is going to be a very good Arizona State team. They jumped into the top 25, and I think they're probably going to stay there pretty much all year and contend for the Pac-12 championship.
Well, they've got some horses running out there, and like I said, the one that I mentioned was Trey Holder, who'd been held in check the last half of the second half against Kansas State, even though they pulled that out by 2. But he just went off on the Muskies. I mean, 14 for 22 from the field, 5 from 8 from three-pointers, 7 for 8 for free throws for a total of 40 points. And, of course, Sean Evans, the second, also scored 22. But it looked like, and we'll talk about this a little bit when we get to the Baylor game, too, that the teams are starting to key on Trevon Blewett. This happened a little bit last year, too, knowing that he was the top scorer. He only had 11 in that game on 4 for 10 shooting. So they're going to make him work for his points. I think he only had 10 against the Baylor Bears. So the other guys have got to step up. And, like I say, when you've got people like Gooden, who is running the offense and got some good kudos against Baylor, which we'll talk about in a little bit, those other guys have got to find a way to score. J.P. McCurra stepped it up with 23. And they did a good job of getting to the line. I mean, Arizona State just crushed us in the line, 23 for 25. There's no way you're topping that. We went 23 times, got 18, which is a good 78% for the Muskies. But you just got to wonder if the rotation is going to come through. We got to get some people to score when Trevon's checked up or not hot. And, of course, like you said just a bit ago, Q is the one that runs the offense, whether he's scoring or not, and they need him in there to handle the ball and to make things happen. So he's got to find a way to stay on the court, which he did against Baylor, and we'll talk about them for a little bit as soon as we get your final thoughts on Las Vegas.
Most positive thing that came out of that game, and I was sitting there thinking it because it was the second time it had happened, Karam Cantor, old man game. And we had heard this about him, that this guy is good. He is 6'10". He doesn't look 6'10", just kind of his build. He doesn't look that tall. But I saw it in that game. He actually had 13 points in 12 minutes. And then you go back 2 games before that, I think it was Ryder. He got 15 points in 14 minutes. And, again, it's kind of that old man game. He gets his position. He backs his guys down, makes a move, and looks really smooth down there. And I think that's going to be important and more important as the season goes on. Plus, he's pretty good at playing some defense. And again, that was one of the other problem there. I think this team had relied on their offense to make up for its shortcomings in defense. And, again, that just blew up in their face down there, which, again, in the long run, I think might be the best thing that happened. In fact, somebody wrote that if they would have beaten Arizona State, they probably would have lost to Baylor or Cincinnati. And, of course, we're halfway to maybe not having that happen at all. So, and the other part of Karam Cantor's game that has not come yet, but I've read that he is a pretty proficient three-point shooter. He's taken a few. I don't know if he's hit one yet. But, again, you know how that is in new environment, new teammates. It seems like even some of the great three-point shooters takes them a little while to get going. But, he could be very, very dangerous at 6'10", being able to pull somebody out away from the basket.
Yeah, you're right there. He was 6 for 6 against the Sun Devils, and he's a presence that we're going to need. Right now the big man shooting the three-pointers, though, is Kaiser Gates, and that came out against the Baylor Bears. I guess the Muskies came out with something to prove. They came out hitting hard, only up 5 at the half, but ended up winning by 13 in the game I'm sure you saw down at the Cintas Center.
Yeah, I did. And, you talk about the key there, Kaiser Gates. Yeah. And here's the thing, Kaiser Gates, third year at Xavier, and he came in as supposedly this great three-point shooter. In fact, many times I would hear Chris Mack say, in the last 2 years that you don't want to play horse against Kaiser Gates. He's our best all-around pure shooter. And you never really saw it in the game. And again, it's easy to shoot three-pointers and knock them down when you're playing horse versus when you got somebody flying at you or in your face. But I think we're really starting to see Kaiser Gates become the player that they had expected when they recruited him, because he was very, very comfortable. And, yeah, he was a star. And, again, part of it is I heard Chris Mack say after the Baylor game, he talked about Trayvon Blewett. Yeah, he only got 10 points, but they were making sure that their best defender was always on him. And he said, and it actually made for better matchups for Kaiser Gates and JP, that they could score more easily. So, he said, I think Trayvon understands that sometimes, him just being on the floor and them so much attention paid to him to defending him, it opens up the other guys. If the other guys can score, hey, who cares who's scoring as long as they're winning?
Yeah, you mentioned that. Like I mentioned, Quentin Gooden able to stay on the floor 26 minutes against the Bears with 9 assists. And that's where he makes his bread and butter. But Kaiser going off for 19. Matera also 19 with some good 8 for 15 shooting from the field. What I like, as I see early, somebody's always stepping up. You got Najal Marshall this time who had 10. You're talking about Kareem Cantor, who he only had 9 this time, but he pops up from time to time. But as you look through the stats, another neat thing is the way the rebounds are being spaced out. They're not counting on any one person. Gates has got 5, Tyreek Jones 7, Blewett 6, Matera 6, and they ended up with 9 different guys getting rebounds at different times, and a lot of those are offensive rebounds. They outdid the Baylor Bears on the offensive board 14-8, and that's going to make some difference with some second-hand points. So that's something that's coming around for the Muskies as well.
That's a very good point, and a couple things to add to that. If you look at the stats from the Baylor game, field goal percentage, three-point percentage, free throw percentage, turnovers, everything's almost equal. You look, what was the difference in this game? And you just touched on it. It was rebounds. 14-8, they had 6 extra possessions over the Baylor Bears, and I believe that was probably the difference in the game. And, of course, having the extra possessions, you got to take advantage of it, which they obviously did. The other thing, and I don't know if you're looking at some season stats in front of you. I don't have them right in front of you, but I would guess just watching the Musketeers this year, here's something that Trayvon Blewett doesn't get very much credit for, and that's his rebounding. But he is a heck of a rebounder, and I would almost guess, again, I don't have the stats right in front of me, he may lead the team right now in rebounds. If not, he's probably it might be Jones. He's done a good job rebounding. But
second to Tyreek Jones, 6.1 to Jones is 6.9, but that's a full rebound ahead of anybody else on the team per game.
Yeah, and Jones has 4 or 5 inches on Trayvon. Trayvon just understands position, and he understands timing. A lot of times there'll be like 4 or 5 guys going up, and you just, why does it always come to him? Well, obviously he understands the shot, where it's going to come off. That's what the great rebounders understand, that other people, you can block a guy out, but if you're not in the right position, you may not get it. But the great rebounders watch the flight of the ball and where they think it's going to come off and get themselves in position there before it comes off the rim or the backboard. So he's doing a lot of things even if he's not scoring. And again, another thing, this is what I'm so excited about this team, is they are deep. Right now they're playing 9 guys significant minutes. And you and I both know that down the road, when it gets into March, that the teams that can do that and get significant minutes out of a deep bench like that, a lot of times that's a key to a long run.
Yeah, and that's something we worried about last year. They were able to deal with it in the tournament, where you may not have to rely on your bench as much unless you get in trouble. So we'll have to see how the balance continues to work out throughout. So, an unfortunate loss to Arizona State, which, like you say, has now popped into the top 25 and could be a power in the Pac-12, which is showing a little bit of signs of weakness here with losses from Oregon State and UCLA, and Arizona losing 3 in a row. So that might be more wide open than we thought. but then a good win against another power team, the Baylor Bears, which leads us to this week's showdown. Is something that's on everybody's mind every year. The showdown, they've moved it back to early in the season. It used to be very early in the season when they did it for years. Then they moved it to the middle of the season. And I believe this is the fourth or fifth time that both teams come in ranked, with Cincinnati at number 11 and the Muskies at number 21. So give us your thoughts on Xavier going in. Of course, they hosted this year at the Cintas Center, where they've had a little more luck than in the overall standings.
Yeah, just on the timing, I like this timing right here. The first 2 weeks of December, in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, I never really liked those. There was years when it was like the first or second game of the year. A lot of times those games are very rough. One team's maybe better prepared than the other. Sometimes those games would get a little bit ugly, as in their how prepared the players were. I don't like what they did last year for both sides, playing in the middle of their conference season. I think it's a big hindrance to, it is a rivalry game, and they get so up for it, and then the next, either the game before or the game after the game before, because they're looking forward to the game after, because it's kind of a emotional letdown. Sometimes it hurts them in their conference schedule. So I like it right here. I think it's a perfect timing. The only problem with it, at one time, this was, ESPN was really, and I'm not even sure, I'm sure it's on Fox probably because it's at Xavier this year, but ESPN was, really kind of showcasing this game. This is the greatest rivalry. These schools are 3.5 miles apart, and they don't like each other, and this is the Super Bowl of the city. Now I lost my thought again. What was I going to say?
Something about ESPN in this show. I don't know.
Well, Saturday, here's the problem. Saturday, what they're going up against is all those big football games, all those conference championship games. So it's going to get buried a little bit nationally. Obviously, it's still going to have the same impact here in the city. I'm sure, a majority of sports fans in the city will be watching it. And the positive is it does have a very early tip-off. It's a noon tip-off, which I think is a good idea, too, because I think sometimes when the games are played later in the day, the fans maybe have too much time to prepare for it, if you know what I mean, and that can cause some problems in the stands, and fans maybe comments directed toward players. And so I like that noon. Somebody can celebrate afterwards, but there's probably not too much preparation time when you have a noon tip-off. So I don't know if they did that on purpose. It probably has more to do with the TV schedule, is why it's being played then. But, looking forward to it. And a little luster maybe taken off of it. Everybody thought it was going to be a top 15 matchup, which, that again would have probably captured more of the attention of the national media if they were both in the top 15. But still, it's one of the kind of a rare time where they both are ranked, because if you look back through the history, a lot of times it was one or the other that was ranked, and a lot of times the one that was ranked would get upset. So I think this is maybe one of the most even matchups. Both teams are very, very talented this year. Both teams can score. Both teams definitely play defense. They pride themselves on defense. So I think it's going to be a great game. Two keys, though, that I think will go in Xavier's favor. Number one, it being played in the Cintas Center. Ever since the Cintas Center opened, the Musketeers are 6-1 against the Bearcats there. Actually, it was the very first meeting that they played in the Cintas that UC won. So the Musketeers actually have a 6-game winning streak on their home floor against the Bearcats. And the other, this is I think will be the tale, is Xavier's played some really tough games already, especially in the last week, and have been tested. And the Bearcats, if you look at their schedule, I think the best team they played was Buffalo, who's picked to maybe win their division in the MAC conference, and they beat them by 6 points. I think that was actually a tournament game somewhere. So I think the experience they've had so far is going to give them a little bit of an advantage, and the home court, again, is going to give them, I think, a big advantage, because again, that was the other factor out in the desert in Las Vegas. It was there's 500 people there. And even though there were a lot of Musketeer fans, they had more fans than the Arizona. You could just feel it the other night against Baylor. That place was packed. It was a total sellout, and it was loud from the tip-off. And I just think that gives the Xavier Musketeers a huge advantage.
Yeah, there are a few things that you've touched on. One, fans are going to celebrate or commiserate around that area no matter what happens, and you want to keep it civil. And luckily, this game has been more civil in the past few years. It's 25 years since Terry Nelson made his famous guarantee, which rankled the Muskie fans, but then they pulled it off. Of course, there was the fight a few years ago, which wasn't something to showcase either team. And it's been a while. And just 2 seasons ago, they both came in ranked, where it's kind of flip-flop. Xavier was number 12 and Cincinnati number 23. And that was at Cintas as well. But it has become more of a friendly rivalry rather than a nasty rivalry. And it is very close in the past few years. Like you say, Xavier does have that 6-1 mark. They actually won 6 in a row. The last 7 times they're 6-1, and they have won 7 of the last 10. And even though the series falls 50-34 in Cincinnati's favor, a lot of that comes from the time when Xavier just wasn't very good, from about the mid 50s into the late 70s. Cincinnati won 22 out of 24. So other than that, it's very close. That would make it 28-32 if you took those games out. But everybody looks forward to this, and you can throw rankings out the window. Like I say, they're only 3 miles away from each other. You can walk or bike here to there. It's going to be a very raucous crowd. Looking at the Bearcats, you hit on something that I was going to talk about. They really haven't played anybody. They haven't been tested yet. Buffalo is the closest. That was down in the Cayman Islands, and in the first game of that tournament, which is more a round robin than it was a tournament. And Richmond played them tough for a half out of the A-10, but they have yet to be tested, whereas the Muskies have faced Arizona State. They've faced Baylor, so they come in a little more battle-tested. But a couple of things in Cincinnati's favor. They do come in 7-0, and this could be Mick Cronin's best squad there. It's going to be based on a hard-nosed defense. I think both teams might struggle a little bit on the offensive end, as you already mentioned. But Cincinnati sort of has that 4-headed scoring dragon of Gary Clark, the senior returning, Jacob Evans, Jaron McCumberland, and the North Carolina State transfer who's finally getting more time on the court, Kyle Washington, with Trey Scott hard on the board. You mentioned Xavier's depth, where they're going 9 deep. Well, Cincinnati's even a little deeper. They go 10 deep. That's, to me, players getting 12 minutes or more, and 8 average over 15, but nobody goes over 25. And that, I think, is a bit of a difference with the Muskies, where they've got their big 3 of Blewett, McCurra, and Gates all playing over 25 minutes, as well as Gooden just right at the 25-minute mark. So Cincinnati might have a little deeper rotation to play in there, and it could go either way. But it's always a fun game now. I mean, now that it's not as nasty and as pointed, you got 2 very classy coaches, both from the Cincinnati area and understand it, Mick Cronin and Chris Mack. I think it's going to be a fun afternoon of basketball, and like you say, the fans will be there, and they won't be as lubricated as they might be by an evening game. And like a lot of people say, I'm just looking forward to seeing what happens on the court.
I'm with you there, and I agree with you that since the brawl and then 2 games being played at a neutral site, I think the game has a better overall tone. In fact, the way I kind of look at it now, I think each team kind of looks at it is they kind of respect the other's program and how successful each other's programs are. And as a Xavier fan, I actually kind of course, obviously hope they win on Saturday, but from that point on, I hope the Bearcats do very, very well, because that makes that win look more important down the road when we get into March and we're starting to look at teams' resumes. So That's the way I think it is. I think, people have pulled back because you and I were both in the city for many, many years, and there were times when it was outright, even before the brawl, there were times when there was pushing and shoving and, things said, and fans, would just go crazy on each other. And I think we've reached a good point, and a healthy rivalry, I think, is where it is now. So I like the way it is.
And of course, with the Muskies, they're going to take. They'll go back to the MAC after this. They play Kent State on Wednesday, and then next week go back to hosting Colorado. The team gave them a tough time. They lost to last year, and where Cincinnati will basically take the week off. I believe it's their exam week, but they do host Florida next week, so that will be another big test for them as they run into what's going on. Looking forward to that, but before we go into other things, let's sort of check in on what's going on in the Big East. And, until we get into conference play, not a whole lot, but you got, Villanova at number 4, and they're fresh off winning the battle for Atlantis, and they're mopping up the Philly area schools, St. Joe's and Penn. But they've got a couple of tests coming up. They're going to host Gonzaga on Tuesday, so that should be an interesting game. And Creighton, as we talked on our Troutcast, has popped into the top 25, right at 25, after they beat Northwestern and UCLA. We'll see how well those wins hold, as both of them have dropped now out of the top 25. And they had a close loss to that Baylor team that we just beat. And they have Gonzaga tomorrow night. So a lot of tests there. Seton Hall dropped out of the top 25, but just by a 1-point loss to Rhode Island, who's going to be a good team. But they've got a couple things coming up with a chance to get back in as they host number 22, and another surprise, Texas Tech tonight. And then they have also at home Louisville on Sunday. So at the top of the Big East, things are good right now.
Yeah, I think the standings are, and really they're not standings because they haven't played each other yet, but the records and how each team in the Big East have done, I think, is of no surprise to anyone. You didn't mention Georgetown. Georgetown's actually 5-0, but they have not played anybody. And I looked at their schedule. About the only game that even looks that might be of some consequence or a challenge is, I think, Syracuse on December the 16th or something. Might be a tough game for them, but I could see them going into the conference 11-1, maybe even 12-0. But I don't fault them, and I think Patrick Ewing, going in there his first year, made a wise choice in scaling back their schedule, realizing that he had some work to do and is going to have some young, inexperienced players. So he wanted to have some non-conference success, so he scheduled it that way. I don't fault him in that. Now, if they turn it around and start to go toward the top of the Big East in the actual standings, and then you see a schedule like that, you would question that. So they're doing well, but everything else kind of pans out the way we expected Villanova to be where they are. We expected DePaul to be where they are, and everybody else somewhere in varying degrees in between. One game, I don't know if you saw it or not, it was on TV here locally, kind of an interest, was Butler and Ohio State. Yep. And that being because Chris Holtmann had to go against his former team. He's only 4 or 5 months removed from them. And I actually saw an interview with him before that game, and he was not looking forward to playing that game. He actually almost became very emotional during the interview. He says it is what it is, and we go out to, do what we need to do. And that was in a tournament, so I think he was probably hoping they weren't going to play each other, but because of how they fell in that tournament with wins and losses, they were paired against each other in the final round. And actually it was an interesting game in the fact that Ohio State, his current team, had his former team down by 15 points in the second half. And the Butler Bulldogs, as we've known, they're always going to be tough, came storming back and took the game into overtime and actually ended up winning. So that's actually, I think, a big win for Butler. Butler with their new coach, is a Jordan Bontel, is that his name? Former player there. I think they're going to be, again, a force to be reckoned with. The Butler way, I think, has survived another coaching change, and I think they're going to be competitive in the Big East. Of course, them and the Musketeers through the past 10 years have had battles, and now, of course, both being in the Big East, they play each other twice, home and home, so it's become even more intense as they know each other. But the Big East is where we thought it would be, and, of course, around New Year's we'll kick off the Big East schedule, and that's when the real fun games begin.
Yeah, that's right. Even well before that, most of them will play their first league game before Christmas, and you're right about that, Butler. I had more of the rundown, but decided to let you get in there. You touched on some good things. Providence, their only loss is against the Minnesota team we've talked about a couple of times. So they did just escape a pesky Rider team by only 4 last night, and that's a team that Xavier thumped by 26 earlier in the year. St. John's is off to 6-1. Their only losses to Missouri, but they've been a little shaky on offense, which isn't like Mullen's team. They only shot 28% against Central Florida, but did come away with a win, and that's probably a team they would have lost to in the past. You didn't mention your son's Marquette Golden Eagles. They're 5-2, the same as Butler, but their only 2 losses were to Wichita State and Purdue. Purdue now out of the top 25, but then they were number 19, and they placed 3rd in the Maui Invitational. And you mentioned DePaul. I think now that the Cubs have won the World Series and Northwestern made the NCAA, they might be tempted to say in the win, this is a team that says wait until next year. But even though they're 2-5, those losses include one to Notre Dame, Illinois, Michigan State, and Oregon. So, they're playing a tough schedule, and they might be somebody to look out for when that Big East play starts around December 20th, 22nd, depending on who you are.
Yeah, and in our other show, of course, I kind of pushed St. John's to the bottom when Chris Mullen, I wasn't quite sure things were happening there, but they might have something to say. I think they might be. They are, I think, very gifted. They got those 2 guards, Shamari Pons and Lovett, that can score a lot of points. So maybe they're going to be closer to the top of the Big East than I thought. And Marquette, I would tell you, I've watched them. And, again, if you look at their wins versus their loss, their 2 losses are against quality programs. But the wins, they really – actually, the other night they were playing Eastern Illinois, who was, I think, 500, and actually went into overtime against Eastern Illinois at home. They're very, very young. They got some talented guys. But I think if they can finish the middle of the pack, that would be a good step forward for them. I think they're a year or 2 away from being back to some of the Marquette teams that we remember.
Well, we'll be watching that in the next couple of weeks as we get into the Big East season, and we'll talk a lot more about the Big East. Obviously, we're in the middle of that, but we're still pretty good. Looking forward to the Crosstown Showdown on Saturday, and I'm sure before that you have a couple of nice little trivia questions for me and our listeners.
I think this is recycled, and I didn't do a very good job this morning, so. Trying to get something on the Crosstown Shootout, and I think I asked you this last year, so this is a review maybe. But of course, the very first Crosstown Shootout obviously wasn't called at that point. Was in 1928, March 7th, 1928. The Bearcats came to the Xavier campus, and the Musketeers pulled out a 29-25 win. Do you know why they invited UC to play them in that game? There was a purpose. There was an event going on with the game.
That is a recycled question, and Jim, I've got disappointed in you. You're not doing your homework. I'm going to have to call your parents and set up a conference here. That was the opening of Schmidt Fieldhouse. And, you did stump me with that last year, though. But, okay, 29-25 within the 27th season, early in 28. But they didn't play for another almost 15 years after that.
Okay, I got another question. I did read this. I'll throw this one at you.
Okay.
In 1928, they were not Xavier University. What was the official name of the school in 1928?
Oh. I mean, I can only say Xavier College because it wasn't a university that was still focusing on undergraduates, but I'm sure there was a fancier name involved with a couple other saints and maybe something in Latin. I don't know. Xavier College.
You're close. You're close. It was officially St. Xavier College at the time in 1928. So you got it. So, okay. New knowledge.
That is. And then, like you mentioned with the Big East in the heyday, of course, in the 50s, they played each other twice a year, which was kind of nice.
Uh-huh.
Xavier was not in a conference; they were independent, and they stopped doing that when both schools sort of found it, especially Cincinnati. So a lot of neat things, and it's a great time to be a basketball fan. Are you done? Or are you still looking through your book there trying to find something else?
No, I'm done for the day.
Well, he accuses me of being on the Internet all the time, but I think he's got that Crosstown Showdown book in his lap right now.
Oh, yeah, I did want to make a pitch. It came out last year, and I read it right before the shootout. It's Inside the Crosstown Shootout by Bill Cook. I'm sure you could get it on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. If you buy actual books, I don't know if you probably get a Kindle copy of it if you really search, but not much time, but it's a great book, reading about the rivalry and the history of it and everything, and talks a lot. He interviewed a lot of players, coaches, and actually even media people who have covered it just to get all the different perspectives on it, and it's a great read. And yeah, it's actually, I did find it this morning. I had to go down to my office to find it. It's sitting right here beside me, but I didn't get much out of it this morning in preparation.
Bill Koch, longtime now, still working for the University of Cincinnati as one of their radio guys, was with the Enquirer for many years. His brother Bob volunteers with us down at the Reds Hall of Fame. Real nice guys, both of them.
Do you have an in? Maybe we can get him on our show sometime.
Well, maybe I could ask. I don't like to make those connections, but we'll see what Bob can do. I'm sure he gets a lot of that for his brother. We'll see where we can go. And in honor of that is the Reds Connection. For those of you who are looking for your baseball Jones, this weekend is Reds Fest down at the Duke Energy Convention Center on Friday and Saturday. It's Friday from 3 to 10:30 and Saturday from 11 to 6:30, so get on down there. And in honor of that, my tidbit goes back to baseball, and Jim will recognize this. Of course, anybody who's a Reds fan will recognize this. It was 36 years ago yesterday that general manager Bob Howsam pulled off the trade of a lifetime, sending all-star first baseman Lee May, Gold Glove winner Tommy Helms, and utility man Jimmy Stewart to the Houston Astros for second baseman Joe Morgan, third baseman Dennis Mankey, outfielder Cesar Geronimo, utility man Ed Armbruster, and starting pitcher Jack Billingham. Though manager Sparky Anderson was quoted at the time as saying, "Mr. Howsam just secured us the pennant. Others weren't so happy with the trade." And you look back with it, kind of like Sparky's famous headline, this is before you're in Cincinnati, when they hired Sparky Anderson, the headline in the Enquirer the next day was "Sparky Who?" Well, everybody knows who he is now. But veteran sports writer Bob Hertzl said that the Reds shouldn't have let Lee May go for anyone less than Willie Mays. Helms would play for another 5 years, and May another 10, including leading the American League in RBI in 1976. But this trade settled all the gears for the Big Red Machine, which would win 4 division, 3 National League, and 2 World Series crowns over the next 5 years. Morgan was an all-star 8 years, all the years that he played with the Reds. Geronimo became a Gold Glove center fielder, and Billingham had back-to-back 19-win seasons. And until the recent run by Madison Bumgarner of the San Francisco Giants, had the lowest ERA for a pitcher in the World Series by almost half a run a game. So big anniversary there, 36 years ago. Mr. Morgan in the news this week with his thoughts on the Hall of Fame voting. But interesting times to be a Reds fan, and we're hoping to get back to that glory in the coming years. So any final thoughts, Jim, before we sign off and let you get ready for your preparations for the Crosstown Showdown?
No, you some good stuff there. We got the Reds Fest kind of conflicting with the Crosstown, but I'm sure any fan who wants to see them both, you obviously can schedule accordingly. But nope, it's just let's hope the Musketeers. I know you kind of have a little more of maybe of allegiance to the Bearcats. That's okay. But on this side of the ledger, we're saying go Muskies.
And I say I get to win the showdown every year, which is a beautiful thing. All right, we'll see you next on our Trogcast on Tuesday, all things NCAA basketball, and we'll be back to talk about the results of the Crosstown Showdown on our Razorcast next Thursday. Thanks to all of you for listening, and yes, of course, go Muskies.